About to start. There it is. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Our session is Columnar Reports and Tables, and our presenter is Robert Schmidt. Please be aware that this session is being recorded. Quick reminder before we get started, please use the chat feature to ask any questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be sure to address them. A copy of the presentation and a link to the recording will be sent to all registrants. If you're not registered and would like a copy, please send me an email and I will include you on the distribution. My email is laurafoley@nordicglobal.com, and I will drop that into the chat. Next slide, please.
My name is Robert Schmidt, so I'm a practice manager with the ERP group over at Nordic, and I'm going to be your presenter today.
Disclaimer real quick. We do have to present our disclaimer that this material is in reference to Infor version 11. This presentation is for informational purposes only. We just want to provide you with consideration as you make the best decisions for your organization. Reliance on the information presented without consultation is at your own risk. We highly recommend that you contact Nordic to discuss how solutions can be tailored specifically to your needs.
Thank you, Laura. So we're going to go in today and be looking at Columnar. So first, we're going to start with what is Columnar. We're going to then go into what are some key advantages and disadvantages of using Columnar. We're going to touch on some key features and working with Columnar. We're also going to look at some requirements. So what do you need to have in order to be able to utilize a Columnar solution? And then finally, we're going to look at two solution examples that were provided by Nordic to clients. So what is Columnar? At a very basic level, Columnar is, in essence, a data storage format. The format is ideally used in both analytics and OLAP applications, which is why it was introduced, or how one of the areas it was introduced into Infor, working with analytics and being able to provide that data out of the system. Infor, and just kind of back, Infor defines that columnar tables use the columnar store format, which is a data storage format commonly used with data warehousing and analytics. So similar to at a basic level, what is it? And then looking a little bit at, because a lot of people are very familiar with relational databases, with kind of our on-prem related and single tenant related deliveries of both LSF and Landmark. So the data in a columnar format is organized into columns, versus where on a relational database, the data is stored in tables in a row column format. On a relational database, the tables follow that predefined relationships that are then built within the tables and within the database in order to make the connections. Whereas on the columnar, we're going to define what the indexes and dimensions and pieces look like, and for us to be able to utilize that data. Columnar tables have, in essence, summarizations on the fields themselves versus the indexes. In order to index the data, and the relational tables have the indexes that are built on the table definitions themselves. So they both have indexes, and they both allow for us to do searching on specific criteria. And for those of us who have used Landmark query nodes and have used some reporting within the Landmark area, Columnar allows us the ability to search on that data and get data in 10 to 100 times faster than we have been able to previously with a Landmark query node, or getting data in those same formats, comparing kind of apples to apples there. And then additional, as most people are well aware, if you're not and you're looking to go to multi-tenant cloud, this will be a big one, is we don't have SQL query access to the multi-tenant cloud. So one of the big reasons we're talking about Columnar, right, is us ability to gain access to data, especially large amounts of data, which we'll talk more about later from the multi-tenant cloud, because we are not able to write those SQL queries. And then I just wanted to kind of give a really basic example here. So on a relational database, we could have very much have a table that has 3 rows in it, 3 columns. If we assume we have like a name, we have a name of people, we have an age for them, and then we have a location for them, right? In a relational database format, that's going to be 3 rows. It's going to have the row with the column being the name, the column being the age, and the column being the location. On the columnar side, we're going to have 3 columns. Each column is going to be a representation of that data type. So we have a column for names of those 3 records. We have a column for the ages, and we have a column for the locations. Um, this allows us to be able to access similar or relevant data faster because it's in a singular column itself. And an example of that is if we wanted to find the average age of our 3 records, because that data is the age is saved in its own column type, right? Its own data type. We're now able to, because it's already grouped together, we're now able to then figure out and do an aggregation or summarization or an algorithm on that column in order to find that average age. So just a very simplistic example of how the columnar helps us over the relational tables. So looking at some key advantages and disadvantages. So on the advantages side, we'll start there first. We have data compression on the columnar side compared to the row format. So the data is, as we talked, stored in columns, and the compression algorithms are then able to utilize the similar value format from each column. In our example, that was like age, right? We had names, we have ages, we have locations. And because of that, the improved compression there based off the same data type allows us for and can allow us for more efficient cache utilization. And of course, improved query performance because of that. So utilizing the same data type allows us to have some compression there. And so how it references each other and be able to make those queries and do those fun things behind the scenes. So similarly to that, because of our data type columning, we have the increased efficiency in aggregations, right? So similar to what I talked about in order to find age, the average age, because I'm in columnar and that data is in the same data type is saved in its own column, I can do that faster to find that aggregation across that in order to look at that. And then processing within large amounts of data, because I have the infrastructure, because of how the data itself is stored, I'm able to go through and pinpoint and look at specific columns to do my aggregations, to do my algorithms, to look for specific data. And because of that, I can process through data a lot faster compared to my landmark query type nodes or compared to my list views within the Infor system. And then, of course, it's native Infor landmark functionality, right? I'm not introducing any new tool or new item brought into the system. This is all built within the landmark system and landmark functionality. And I'm going to use, as we talk about in requirements, I'm going to use landmark functionality in order to be able to process through that. So let's take a look at disadvantages, right? We just looked at advantages. Let's take a look at disadvantages. Columnar really does not give us a good view into, or doesn't give us real time related data because it's going after the fact. And what we're going to talk about is using replication sets. We are going to be looking at, in essence, near real time, right? So we're going to be able to pull the data out on usually some sort of schedule in order for us to process through that. But because of that, I'm not going and getting data at that moment. I'm getting it shortly after that. And because we're looking at delta data, right? I'm looking at data that has changed. I can get it fairly often, up to every 15 minutes. I mean, we've seen up to every 5 minutes because the data is only getting deltas and changes. We can pull it more frequently, but I'm still not getting the actual real-time data. I'm just getting near real-time. And there's going to be some upfront build and development here, right? We're talking about pulling out, I mentioned the replication sets. There's other pieces that we're going to talk about here in a minute, but because of that, I need to be able to build some stuff up front in order to be able to provide my solution or the pieces of my solution from doing that. So config console, replication sets, those pieces that we'll talk about from a requirement perspective. But there is upfront build that I have to do in order to be able to utilize it. This next bullet, poor performance, creating, updating, deleting sense row data and data that must be changed frequently. What we're talking about here is if I'm doing updates to data, am I making changes to data? If I'm doing stuff in a more real-time related format and more singular row format, right? If I have singular records, if I have singular related data elements, and I'm changing them on a regular basis, and I being with those singular and transactional, singular row transactional related data. So if I'm doing that, Columnar may not be the best solution depending on what we're looking at. And obviously, if you have any questions around that, we're more than happy to try and help there as well. So please let us know. And then the last piece here, this is just really around some of the solutions that we provided because of Columnar, because of some of the powerful things it does, because of some of the infrastructure and structure that's behind the scenes, Columnar is it can do so much behind the scenes, and you just want to be really careful and be cognizant of what you can present within Landmark, within a list view or within data that's being presented. So you can do a lot behind the scenes, and because you can process a lot, just making sure that the go between those two is good, because if you're doing too much on the screen, you may in essence lose what you're trying to do because of Columnar, because you're presenting to the end user what's going there. And we'll talk a little bit about that in one of our solutions, right? Okay. So what are some of our key features? Columnars provide us lists. One of the ways we present is being a list. That's going to be able to provide us a way of showing such stuff like a record counts. We can provide, some totals, some subtotals. It's going to allow us the ability to do some sorts and to do some filtering, to present that data back to our end users. Within the behind the scenes, so aggregations, we can do stuff like sums, we can do averages, mins and maxes, instant type counts, and we can include stuff, like rollups. And then across the system, right, we can use data in business classes across FSM, supply chain, finance, payroll. I'm sorry, human HR, payroll. We can access the system across different business classes, including user business classes, right? As long as we're utilizing the database level joins, and whether we need to create some as well that are, valid, accurate, efficient joins, we can access the data across the system in the delivered business classes, as well as accessing the data in a user business class, in order to provide data across for our solutions. And we'll talk about, solutions that we had here in a second. And then the kind of parts that we have columnar lists, we have charts, aggregations. Those actually can be used with REST APIs. So you're going to want to be careful on the aggregations. You want to be careful on what you're presenting to be consumed by the API. But columnar can be, in essence, produced and provided over to a REST API call that can grab that data from there in order to utilize it across, utilize that call of the data. What are some of the requirements? So I've talked a lot about some of the different pieces that we're able to provide. We just want to really call through because there are some very specific requirements here. So the very first and foremost, and probably one of the most important requirements that we have is replication sets. So we're going to define a replication set within Landmark. That replication set, one of the features in there is the export format, and you have to set the export format to columnar in order to be able to provide columnar related data out of the replication. Okay. So that way, when the replication set runs, that's our finding of the data, right? That's our raw data of the business classes, our user business classes across the system using those relations. That's being able to collect that data up and then export it, in this case, to a columnar format, which allows us the ability to utilize that within config console and present it to the end users. So a couple of the rest of these are really related to how can we utilize and present the data across to our end users. So one of the first pieces is we have to have a list form. So we need to either declare or reutilize a list form that's already there and that columnar will be able to use. We then need to implement a search form, right? We need, generally speaking, most of our solutions have included the ability to search on specific data fields. So we need a search that would include any of the fields that our end users would want to search upon from the data set that we're pulling. And then we're going to implement a columnar view as part of that config console. So first we have a list form. We generally use a search form. We implement the columnar view. And then the next piece is we have to declare at least one chart. And our chart is an aggregation table with our dimensions. And then we talked about our index related pieces. Those dimensions are our indexes as we relate to columnar. And then the last piece, we have to declare at least one measure. So um, our measures are what we want to use to summarize. But even if we're not doing summarizations, we still have to have a one measure within the config console pieces that we're providing. So we're talking about in these requirements related to kind of physically, how do I have to define and deliver my format from the data being pulled across to the end user. But the piece that I want to tie in on a little bit here is what's the knowledge, right? There's a lot of stuff I've talked to here around config console. So obviously we need to have config console related knowledge, right? A lot of this is a bit more advanced config console. Not to say that you can't work through it if you haven't done a lot in config console. Might take you a little bit longer, right? And there are some example related stuff that's being delivered from Infor that you can utilize as a base for what you're trying to do. But you are going to need some config console related knowledge and config console slash LPL related knowledge. Um, we talked about the first and foremost, right? Step one, we're going to need to have some replication set knowledge. We need to be able to define the replication set. We need to be able to provide that data out in order for it to be used across and used within the LPO that we're writing. And then the last piece is really being able to understand the application. So having more application related knowledge. So whether that's you having knowledge of being able to understand how the data is connected in, let's say, finance, or let's say HR, or working with someone within your group or within your organization that has that functional knowledge, that knows the way that the different pieces of data are connected to each other. But understanding how the data relates to each other is going to be a key piece of understanding and making sure that we're presenting that data back in a way that's highly utilized for our end users. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple solutions. These are our consultants have working with clients. They provided back, in essence, requests, and we were able to provide a columnar related solution for them. So our first request was a client that wanted to be able to keep over 6 million related records accessible from the multi-tenant cloud. So they had data that they wanted to be able to go back and review and act upon or revisit. But they were going into the multi-tenant cloud and they needed to be able to search on it. They needed to be able to extract it and do some stuff outside of the system. And they still needed to be able to do some updates to it as they had different changes going on down the line. So the first piece that was defined was a user business class, right? So we created a user business class within the multi-tenant cloud that contained all of the different data elements that they would want to utilize going forward in order to be able to review that, do some analyzations on that, and provide that down the line, and be able to make some small edits to the data that sits inside of there. So we had a columnar table, right? And in order to be able to provide the data from the user business class, and additionally, it pulled some data from delivered business classes. Um, we provided a search form, right? We wanted the end user to be able to search within that user business class different data elements that are in there. And then we additionally provided a list form. So how are we presenting that data back to our end users? And that was via the configured list form. So when we first defined it, right, we created the user business class, and then we in essence attached it to a standard list view, right? Can we present it back from the data in the user business class, and the initial results back were that anytime something was searched, in all reality, the search just timed out. It was just too much data that it needed to go through and provide results back in order to present that back to the end user, which of course at that point wasn't really usable at all because it's just going to sit there and spin and try and find what it looked for. And then the system, the web portal was just timing out in order before it was presenting those results back. So that's where we wanted to utilize Columnar. So we wanted to get that advantage of that behind the scenes structured data in order to be able to have the power of Columnar to provide that information back when they're looking for it. And because of the way that the data is now stored and putting the pieces in place that we talked about, most times when the end user was searching for results, they were getting the results within 5 seconds, and most of the time it was within 1 or 2 seconds. So we went from timing out of a web list view into turning results back within seconds, looking through more than 6 million records. So the power there is huge, being able to process through and chug through that data to provide what we're looking for within seconds. And a lot of times they were getting the data from a list view and then in essence exporting it to like a CSV file for additional analysis, additional pieces that are being done outside of the system, and provide that data out to subsystems or different individuals within the organization. So very powerful being able to process through and get through that data in order to understand how or be able to provide back that results to them from within the user business class that existed and got built in the multi-tenant cloud. Okay, solution two. So a client was in essence implementing talent acquisition. They had talent acquisition related data. They wanted to be able to present back where are they at related to requisitions. So, how many new requisitions do I have? How many new requisitions do I have per my entities? How many open ones or hold ones? Type of data. How do I present this information? Right. I have all of these requisition related pieces that are built in the system. They're being held in the system. But how can I present that information back in a usable format for my end users in order for them to be able to key in on that and make adjustments as needed based off of the data that's already there, right? So we then looked at columnar, right? We know from pulling the data that we can do, subtotals, totals. We can do that summarizations behind the scenes. So we took all of the required related pieces for multiple related deliveries, and we're going to see that here in just a second. But we took all of that and we put it together in a singular replication set so that we have one replication that's pulling all the data elements we needed. And then we were able to build, I talked about that we needed, a list. We needed a search. In this case, the list we provided, we created multiple lists. And then presenting the multiple lists back within a singular dashboard related delivery to the end users. This, of course, we used one columnar table to create and utilize multiple lists. And this is a screenshot of what was provided across. So we have a recruiter related dashboard, right? We have in here, we have multiple lists. So on our top left, these are new requisitions that are being submitted. I have, in this case, I'm looking at subtotals, right? I'm looking at how many new requisitions do I have for each of my different entities that are within the system. And we actually toggled on and off totals because they did want to be able to have totals, but they didn't want it presented all the time. So we have totals in there, and that's provided within the list, but it's not presented right at this point. To the right, we have open point in time. So this is looking back a specific period of time in order to provide back how many open requisitions do we have. Once again, we're rolling that up under each entity, and we're providing that subtotal, right, per entity over on the right-hand side. And then based on status, we have our open, our on hold point in time, right? How many of those requisitions are on hold? So each of these is a different list that's providing data coming from the same replication that has an export format of columnar, right? It allows me the ability to do those summarizations within each column in order to present that to a list. In this case, we didn't need to provide a search, right? There is some search functionality that's being provided, but the end user, and they didn't want them to be able to do specific searches on the dashboard. They really wanted this kind of clip of data that's being broken out per entity in order for them to understand where they're at, right? And provide that from a list view that's presented to them. So that brings us through kind of what is columnar. We talked about key advantages. We talked about some requirements. We talked about a few solutions that have been provided out there. So at this point, open it up to see if there's any sort of questions that anyone has.
Actually, I don't think we have any questions right now, Robert.
Alrighty. Well, it sounds like we did a really good job presenting the information then.
I think so. I think so. Great job. Great job. Can you go to the next slide, please? If you find you do have questions down the road on this topic or other Infor related topics, please keep our Coffee with Consultants offering in mind. It allows you 30 minutes of complimentary time with one of our consultants to get questions answered or solve any pain points you may have. You can visit our website and sign up, or send me an email, and I would be happy to schedule that for you. Next. Our February series continues each Friday through February 23rd. Please register and join us. You can always send an email to me, and I will be happy to register you. And after the February series concludes, we will have our next quarterly series in May 2024. So please look for more information towards the end of April. And last but not least, our sales solutions executives will be at Infor Connect May 22nd, 21st, and 22nd in St. Paul. So if you are there, please stop by and say hello. We will have more information on presentations and other events soon. So thank you, Robert, for doing the session with us of Informative Friday, and thank you everyone for attending. And I hope I see you next week. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.